She was 82 now, her hair silver, her hands thin and soft, her steps slow. But one thing had not aged, had not weakened, had not faded: the memory. It came to her in quiet moments, while washing dishes, while folding the same linens she had folded for 50 years, while lying awake at night when the world was still. She didn't speak of it, not even in prayer. It was too old, too heavy, too full of shame. She had lived a decent life since then, raised children, helped neighbors, went to church every Sunday. But deep down, she still carried that one wound, like a scar she never let the light touch. People often said she was a woman of faith. She smiled and nodded, but when she was alone, she whispered the truth only God could hear. "I believe he forgave others, but I don't think he forgave me." To those around her, she seemed peaceful, gentle, soft-spoken, always ready with a word of comfort. But kindness had become her mask. Each smile was carefully sewn over the ache she refused to show. She had long ago decided that she deserved no joy. Her laughter, when it came, always ended too soon, as if she remembered she wasn't entitled to it. Children loved her, neighbors trusted her, but she felt like an imposter in her own goodness. God uses better people, she thought often, and every time someone praised her, the memory returned, the thing she couldn't undo, the decision she couldn't take back. So she lived quietly, serving everyone, but never letting anyone truly see her. She didn't realize it yet, but grace was already moving toward her, slowly, gently, as only Jesus can. Every night, she sat by her bed and whispered names: her children, her grandchildren, her friends who were ill, even the neighbor's cat once, when it went missing. She prayed for all of them, for mercy, for peace, for blessing, but not for herself. Whenever her thoughts drifted toward her own heart, a shadow rose inside her, the old voice that said, "You don't deserve it." She believed in forgiveness, but only as something beautiful for others. She never felt clean enough to ask for it herself, and so her prayers stopped at the edge of her own name, like waves that reached the shore and turned back again. Heaven heard them all the same, but she didn't know yet that Jesus was saving the last and most precious answer for her, the one she'd never dared to ask. There was a small oval mirror in her hallway. It had hung there since her youth. Lately she passed it quickly, avoiding her own eyes. She could still see the young woman she had been, the one who made choices in fear and pride, who spoke harshly, who hurt someone who had loved her deeply. That woman still looked back at her sometimes. "Look what you became," the memory whispered. "You've built a good life, but not a clean one." And she would lower her gaze, ashamed, telling herself that some stains were too old to wash away. But she was wrong, because grace, real grace, doesn't fade with time. It waits. It pursues, and soon it would find her, even here, in the small house of her regrets. Every night after the house had grown still, she would sit in her chair by the window, hands folded, eyes distant. No one knew why she cried. The children, grown and busy with their own lives, assumed it was simply age. The neighbors, polite and gentle, never asked. But the tears were not for lost time or lost people. They were for the self she could never forgive. A moment from decades ago, a word she wished she could take back, a choice that had changed everything in its quiet way, haunted her in silence. She wept quietly, her body trembling under the weight of what she kept locked inside. And she whispered to the dark, "If only I could be forgiven, even now." Sundays were hardest. The familiar songs, the prayers lifted by others, stirred something in her chest she tried to ignore. She would sit in the last pew, bow her head, smile faintly when someone greeted her, but inside her heart was heavy with shame. She could pray for others, for family, for friends, for the world, but not for herself. Her eyes were dry, but her spirit ached. Even the familiar hymns seemed to echo the guilt she carried. The words promised mercy, yet she couldn't believe the promise was for her. And in that quiet corner of the sanctuary, Jesus was already near, listening, watching, waiting. All her life she had clung to a quiet belief. God forgave the repentant, the humble, the faithful. But somehow She thought her own mistakes were too heavy, too deep. Even in prayer she could not speak the truth aloud. "I am not worthy," she would whisper in the darkness. She believed that mercy had limits, and that her heart had already crossed them. Her life, outwardly good, was a mask covering years of quiet regret. She didn't realize it yet, but the God who sees the heart is never limited by human shame. Even when she thought forgiveness impossible, he had already extended it, waiting for her to receive it. It happened on a night painted with silver moonlight. Her hands shook as she held the old Bible. Her voice, barely audible, broke the silence. "Lord, I am so sorry for all of it. I have carried this shame too long. Please forgive me." The words, soft and trembling, were the first she had spoken about herself in decades, and for the first time she did not wait for an answer. She did not try to convince herself she was forgiven. She only let the plea leave her lips. Then, in the quiet of the room, something shifted. She felt a presence, gentle, warm, steady, as if the weight that had crushed her was being lifted piece by piece. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to breathe. And in that moment, she understood what she had never dared to hope. Forgiveness had already found her. The following mornings were still quiet, but something had changed. She no longer walked through her house with the heaviness of shame. Instead, a subtle warmth accompanied her steps, as if the air itself had grown gentle. She glanced at the mirror and expected to see the same worried, hesitant face, but the reflection seemed softer. The eyes that had once avoided their own gaze now held a spark she hadn't noticed in years. The presence was quiet, tender, almost imperceptible, but it stayed. It did not demand her strength. It did not remind her of her failings. It simply remained, near and faithful, a reminder that the one who forgives does not walk away. For the first time she began to realize she was not alone, and she had never truly been. One afternoon, as she sat by the window, hands folded over her lap, she felt a quiet stirring inside her heart. It was not a voice she heard with her ears, but a message so clear it filled the room around her. "You are loved. You are forgiven. You have been mine all along." She blinked, astonished, not because she doubted it, but because it felt impossible. She had carried guilt for decades, told herself that some things could never be undone. And yet, here it was, freedom resting gently in her chest. She didn't need to confess again. She didn't need to list every fault. All that mattered was his love, already sufficient, already complete, already hers. And in that moment, she understood the simplest truth of grace. Forgiveness does not ask for explanation. It asks only for acceptance. The tears came quietly, sliding down her cheeks like a gentle stream. Not of regret, not of fear, not of sorrow, but of relief, of release. For so long she had carried shame like a heavy cloak, weaving it into every thought, every gesture, every prayer. Now she wept because it was no longer necessary. The burden had been lifted. The chains she had thought eternal were broken by unseen hands. She touched her chest, where the ache had always lived, and felt something new: softness, lightness, hope. The tears kept coming, but each drop was a blessing, each one a whisper of grace she had never dared to imagine for herself. The morning light found her smiling softly. Her house, once heavy with the weight of unspoken shame, seemed to breathe with her. Every corner felt lighter. The old photographs, once painful, now whispered of memory, not regret. The weight of decades lifted, replaced by warmth that flowed from the present she could not see, yet felt in every step, every sigh, every heartbeat. For the first time, she felt whole. Not because the past was erased, but because it had been met by a love so deep that nothing could remain unchanged. Her life, once shadowed by shame, now glimmered softly with light, a light that promised she was finally free. One afternoon she took out an old sheet of paper. A pen hovered above it, trembling in her hand. She wrote slowly, each word deliberate. "Forgive me, I have carried this shame too long. I did not know better. I was afraid. I wish I could undo the hurt I caused." Her tears blurred the ink, but she continued writing, pouring out decades of regret. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully, then sat silently, holding it to her chest. She did not mail it. There was no need. The act of writing had been enough. Her heart had spoken, and the one who had always heard had already answered. For Jesus had filled the void in her soul, and the forgiveness she longed for had been given freely, long before she dared to ask. The next morning, she rose with a lightness she hadn't felt in decades. Even her steps seemed to carry a song. She greeted the neighbors differently, not out of duty, but with genuine warmth. She accepted compliments with ease, not hiding behind a polite smile anymore. Her heart, once weighed down by shame, moved freely toward others. She forgave herself as fully as Jesus had forgiven her, and in that forgiveness, she began to live again. The acts that had once felt empty now had meaning. Her hands that had trembled with fear now reached out to help, to comfort, to love. She discovered something simple yet profound. Freedom is not only found in being forgiven, but in walking as one who knows they are. There were still memories, moments she could never change, words she had spoken, decisions she wished she could undo, but they no longer hurt. They no longer clawed at her heart. Instead, they became reminders of a grace that exceeds all understanding. She looked back on her life with humility, not regret, and whispered quietly, "Lord, even my mistakes were not wasted. Thank you for holding me through them." Every photograph, every keepsake, every mark of the past was now softened by the light of forgiveness. Her shame had not disappeared. It had been transformed, and in that transformation she found peace. People began to notice the change. Her neighbors felt her warmth. Her children noticed her quiet joy. Even the birds that landed on her window seemed to linger longer. She walked through the world lightly, as if freed from invisible chains. Her words were gentle, her hands caring. Every act of kindness now carried a weightless beauty, born from the forgiveness she had received. She could love again, without fear, without reservation, because the past no longer held her captive. And in the quiet of her own heart, she whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord, for forgiving me when I thought I was beyond forgiveness." Her life, once shrouded in shame, now radiated a quiet grace, the grace that comes from being truly known and truly loved. People began to notice the change. Her neighbors felt her warmth. Her children noticed her quiet joy. Even the birds that landed on her window seemed to linger longer. She walked through the world lightly, as if freed from invisible chains. Her words were gentle, her hands caring. Every act of kindness now carried a weightless beauty, born from the forgiveness she had received. She could love again, without fear, without reservation, because the past no longer held her captive. And in the quiet of her own heart, she whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord, for forgiving me when I thought I was beyond forgiveness." Her life, once shrouded in shame, now radiated a quiet grace, the grace that comes from being truly known and truly loved. Years passed gently after that night of forgiveness. Her hair grew whiter, her hands softer, her steps slower, but her heart was lighter than it had been in decades. One evening, she sat in her favorite chair, the sun dipping low, painting the walls gold. She folded her hands, closed her eyes, and felt the presence that had never left her. She whispered softly, "Thank you for walking with me all my life." And there was no fear, no trembling, no regret. Her heart rested, knowing she had been forgiven, knowing she had lived in grace, knowing she was going home. When she opened her eyes, there was no more weight, no more limitation. The one who had whispered forgiveness into her heart long ago stood before her, radiant, loving, familiar. His eyes held all the warmth, all the mercy, all the joy she had ever longed for. "Welcome, my child," he said softly. "I have forgiven you, even before you dared to ask." She smiled, tears of relief and joy streaming down her cheeks. No words were needed. Every unspoken prayer, every sigh of shame, every whispered plea was already answered. She stepped into eternity, not carrying her past, but embraced fully by the one who had redeemed it. In heaven, the memory of her past no longer hurt. It shimmered like sunlight on water, not sharp or piercing, but gentle and bright. Every mistake, every regret, every sorrow had been met by love. Even her silence, her fear, her doubt had become sacred threads in the tapestry of grace. Her story spread quietly among the angels, a testament that nothing is too broken for the mercy of Jesus. Even eternity itself could not diminish the power of forgiveness. And somewhere forever, her heart whispers to every weary soul on earth, "Do not fear your past. He has already forgiven you."